You did the psychedelics because you were trying to heal or fix your anxiety, and for a while, it worked. But then it came back. This is part of a series where I break down why that happens and what's actually helped me to deal with it. Because there's something that nobody prepares you for in the psychedelic community. The healing was real that you felt. The peace, the insight, the connection, it was all something you'd never experienced before. And this can last for days, weeks, sometimes months afterwards. That part wasn't fake, but the anxiety itself came back, usually within a few weeks. Racing thoughts, nervous system spikes, spirals. Honestly, for some people, including myself, it came back worse than before. And that becomes really confusing because you went in looking for healing, got something real, and then it faded. And before I go on, I want to be really clear about something. This video isn't about saying that psychedelics are bad or that they don't work. They've genuinely healed things for me, real things, including addiction. They just couldn't do the anxiety for me. And I actually think psychedelics could, in theory, handle anxiety if the exact mechanism, the exact piece of your life history driving it was known and directly targeted in the ceremony itself. But that's just not the reality of how we go into psychedelic ceremonies. And that gap is actually what this video series is about. So if it's not that psychedelics don't work, why don't they touch the anxiety specifically? That's what we're going to get into next. Psychedelics gave me real healing, just not for my anxiety. So why does this gap exist? Here's what I think is actually going on. A lot of people come into a psychedelic space or the psychedelic space new. And when they leave ceremony without their anxiety resolved, especially when other things did heal, it's quite disorientating. You find yourself thinking, oh, that worked in this specific way, but wow, this other aspect is actually worse, your anxiety. This can leave you feeling lost or disenchanted with the whole thing without realizing that actually this is quite a common experience. Part of the problem is the community around psychedelics. The psychedelic space is full of people who are well-meaning and genuinely experienced, but experienced in one thing. They know the chemistry, they've had the experiences themselves, but a lot of them only have one healing modality, one tool, and that's the lens that everything gets filtered through. I've seen this directly. I've had multiple interactions with psychedelic content creators in this space, and you can watch it happen in real time. Anything that doesn't get resolved is met with, you just need to integrate more or do more ceremonies, and eventually you'll find the healing that you need. You just have to keep going, in other words. But there's a real problem with this. You can't integrate something you don't understand, and using the same tool over and over isn't going to get you different results if neither the tool nor the community built around it can actually locate the root of what's going on. Even the ceremonies themselves aren't usually built for this. In my own experience in Peru, shamans generally aren't able to work with anxiety as a specific nervous system pattern. That's just not their focus. Most ceremonies aren't personalized to you specifically. People show up and they receive whatever comes in that session. It's a bit random. There's some nuance here if you're doing like a dedicated plant dieta, but that's not the path that most people are actually on. Now, put all of that together and a lot of people fall through the gaps, healed in some ways, but still anxious, with little solid idea where to turn to next. So, if the community's generic advice isn't built for anxiety specifically, what about the standard integration advice itself? The stuff everybody tells you to do in the psychedelic community. That's next. Generic integration advice in the psychedelic community is something like eat well, be in nature, journal, be mindful. You've heard all the standard integration advice before. Here's why none of it actually touches your anxiety. And I do want to be fair about this. It's not wrong, this advice. Eating well helps, nature helps, mindfulness helps. The problem isn't that these things are useless. The problem is that they're not personalized enough to actually reach your anxiety specifically. For example, journal on what exactly, in what style? Be mindful of what precisely? The insights you get from a ceremony can be all over the place. Some emotional, some spiritual, some just strange and hard to categorize. How do you know which ones are actually connected to your anxiety and which ones aren't? Freestyle journaling on its own usually doesn't get you very far. You end up writing pages and pages without ever landing on the one thing that's actually running underneath your anxiety. Or if you do, not actually releasing it. There is a difference neuroscientifically between releasing while journaling and further ingraining the emotions while writing. Are you doing it correctly? There are more targeted techniques that do release things. Just for example, I lean heavily on methods that come from people like Kathy O'Brien, which I've turned into specific prompts I now use daily on my own anxious patterns. The difference is specificity. Generic advice treats integration like a single practice. Everyone does the same way. It's not. It has to be personalized to what's actually driving your anxiety. Your own history, your own patterns of thoughts and behavior built up over your entire life. For most people, whose anxiety came back hard after a ceremony, there's more sitting underneath than the ceremony was able to reach. The psychedelics helped, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. Now, this next part is really important. The anxiety was a symptom. The cause is still sitting underneath, untouched. Let me say that again. The anxiety is a symptom. The cause of that anxiety is underneath, sitting there untouched. So, if the cause is still down there untouched, why can't you just see it yourself? That part's next. Why is the cause of your anxiety hidden? Hint, it's the subconscious. The human subconscious is actually in some ways a great barrier to healing. This is because you can have things down there that you don't even know about consciously. You can have memories you forgot from childhood simply because they were a very long time ago. In this case, you probably won't associate them with your anxiety, and you can therefore miss the emotions and patterns of thinking, behavior that those events instilled in you as an adult. It's also possible that you will have memories that were completely blocked out from your memory simply because they were too horrific or traumatizing to remember. They can be violence, accidents that befell you, sexual abuse, all sorts of events, but importantly, the emotions that they carry can still be with you as an adult. The effect of these things does not get hidden. It becomes the tip of the iceberg, the anxiety. This anxiety can be representative of these events and associated emotions, and this anxiety can greatly impact your thinking as an adult. But these things hidden beneath the surface in the subconscious are not completely inaccessible. By definition, the subconscious is somewhat inaccessible, but not completely so. We can use Reiki to view them again, very gently in most cases. In my own experience in giving Reiki to around 40 people at this stage, as well as my own healing experiences, we can, with this 4 planes method, we can triangulate the patterns that were the root cause of the anxiety, and then in the Reiki session, heal for them. So the specific method that I use to do this is, as I already mentioned, the 4 planes method. This is a conversation about the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual state that you're in. And we use this information to understand where the issues are that are holding you back in your subconscious. And then I use my Reiki training to apply Reiki energy to those areas, as well as give you an understanding of the patterns that I'm seeing. Once these patterns are made conscious, we have in fact already healed to a degree, but there's more that can be done with specific journaling techniques. Of course, the Reiki energy itself is healing by its nature. It makes us feel very good, but often multiple sessions can be required in order to fully root out and understand the issues in the subconscious. Next video, we're going to dive deeper into the subconscious. There's more to talk about here. In this video, we're going to talk about what Reiki showed me specifically about anxiety. In Reiki, you can see into someone's subconscious to a significant degree and with a view to healing, right? And this includes the roots of their anxiety. So I started to realize this when I started training in Reiki, where we need to give 40 sessions to 40 different individuals in order to progress to what they call the master level. So while giving these sessions, I started noticing very similar anxiety driving patterns repeating across different people, and also I recognized these same patterns in myself. So through this process, I was able to learn from other people and apply these lessons to myself. I was also able to learn what patterns other people need to solve in order to reduce dramatically and manage their own anxiety. Remember, this isn't medical advice, right? This process of learning through giving Reiki to others was very interesting in respect to the subconscious. In the last short, we spoke about how the subconscious is in many ways a barrier to healing. Just because it's not easily understood what's down there, like in terms of patterns, behaviors, emotions, old events that we don't remember, or maybe we do, but it's not clear to us how they contribute to us as an adult. Due to this aspect of the subconscious, it's hard for me to see into my own subconscious, my own subconscious, even with my abilities in Reiki. So it's actually easier, in my opinion, to see into someone else's subconscious in a Reiki session. It's not impossible to see into your own, but that's a topic for another video. All of that is to say that there are ways to peer into the subconscious and see patterns of anxiety. So let's talk about some examples that I've seen of these kinds of patterns. And I can kind of go on about this for a long time, but let's just discuss two particular examples quickly. One person's experience was a very early medical emergency as a newborn, and the first 10 days of their life they were in a hospital cot with many needles and tubes, which gave them a lot of pain and discomfort. And also during this 10 days, they were only really touched by the doctors as they were like putting in these kinds of like needles and tubes and stuff. And so this led to like a great feeling of like abandonment and like a lack of nurturing and comfort and compassion, which eventually showed itself as a complex of issues, multiple things, one of which was anxiety. Another example was one person they had parents that had their own psychological issues, and these psychological issues meant that as a very young person, this person was made to clean and wash themselves before coming back into the house after they were outside playing. And this went on for years and years, and they basically grew up in this environment. And what we understood is that this led to a feeling of shame, which eventually became a lack of self-confidence and later anxiety, among other issues, right? One thing that I've been noticing from these Reiki sessions is that there is often a complex of issues that come up, right? Physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual issues that arise from these early experiences and are down there in the subconscious, difficult in a form which is difficult to understand, right? And so when in a Reiki session, you can like work with these deep patterns and sort of start to unwind them, leading to like a reduced anxiety. What I notice also is that people don't really know that they can solve for this with Reiki and journaling, like I do. Even when I tell them about it, they sort of don't really know what's possible, I think. And so I suppose that's what a lot of this content is for, is to educate about this. One person's experience was a very early medical emergency as a newborn, and the first 10 days of their life they were in a hospital cot with many needles and tubes, which gave them a lot of pain and discomfort. And also during this 10 days they were only really touched by the doctors as they were like putting in these kinds of like needles and tubes and stuff. And so this led to like a great feeling of like abandonment and like a lack of nurturing and comfort and compassion, which eventually showed itself as a complex of issues, multiple things, one of which was anxiety. Another example was one person had they had parents that had their own psychological issues, and these psychological issues meant that as a very young person, this person was made to clean and wash themselves before coming back into the house after they were outside playing. And this went on for years and years, and they basically grew up in this environment. And what we understood is that this led to a feeling of shame, which eventually became a lack of self-confidence and later anxiety, among other issues, right? One thing that I've been noticing from these Reiki sessions is that there is often a complex of issues that come up, right? Physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual issues that arise from these early experiences and are down there in the subconscious, difficult in a form which is difficult to understand, right? And so when in a Reiki session, you can like work with these deep patterns and sort of start to unwind them, leading to like a reduced anxiety. What I notice also is that people don't really know that they can solve for this with Reiki and journaling, like I do. Even when I tell them about it, they sort of don't really know what's possible, I think. And so I suppose that's what a lot of this content is for, is to educate about this. So why does just bringing a pattern into the consciousness start healing all on its own? Surfacing a subconscious pattern can reduce the anxiety almost immediately, and it can genuinely feel like healing in that moment, and it is. But the instant shift isn't the finish line. It usually needs more integration to become fully healed. That's not a bad thing, and it's not out of reach. It's just the honest shape of the process. What is actually happening here is that once something becomes conscious, you start catching it in real time instead of just letting it sweep you away. Before, the anxiety seemed to come out of nowhere. Now you can see its causal chain, so to speak. You understand what led up to it, so instead of just reacting, you can choose a different response. Or at minimum, recognize it as it's happening. Oh, there's my anxiety again from X, Y, or Z. That recognition alone is actually real progress, even before anything else changes. Usually it takes more than one sighting of a pattern for it to really land. That's where the journaling method I developed, I call it O'Brien style, comes in. It keeps the pattern under the microscope until it's been seen and explored enough that you can consciously choose how to respond to it rather than just reacting on autopilot. And I do need to be honest about the timelines here, because I don't want to overclaim things. This isn't something that disappears in one journal entry or one Reiki session. What I've seen through continued journaling combined with consistent Reiki work is that the anxiety can be reduced dramatically to the point where it stops running your life. In my own experience, that's been roughly a 1 to 2 year process. Yours may look different, the time period that works for you. The two pieces work together, but they're not doing the same job. Surfacing the pattern and making it conscious is what lets you interrupt the thoughts and decisions that keep feeding the anxiety. That's the part journaling supports. Reiki works on a different level, energetically, in what I'd call the energy body or the aura. It can shift, unblock, rebalance the places where energy has been stuck. As I covered in my other series, How Energy Healing Works, when that universal energy flows properly, you see it show up not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, and also spiritually. So the real takeaway, long-term healing depends on you actually learning the pattern. That's what the journaling does. Reiki can unblock things energetically in the short term and give you real relief. But if you don't also get a handle on the pattern itself, the anxiety is likely to come back because you're still living in a way that reinforces it. So here's the actual method that I use to find what's driving your anxiety. A 4 Planes Reiki session starts as a conversation. That conversation is how I triangulate where your anxiety is actually coming from. accurately before we even get into the Reiki session itself. We go through your state of health across 4 planes: physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, along with relevant pieces of your life history. That's where the 4 planes name comes from. From there, I draw on my own experience, both as someone who's been on this healing path and as someone who's given now more than 40 different Reiki sessions to 40 different people. We use this to figure out what's actually needed, what energies need balancing in the Reiki session, what cords need cutting, where the work will have the most impact on the most blocked part of your system, basically the lowest hanging fruit. That lowest hanging fruit idea is something that I tackle in the first session. From there, it's usually a multi-session process working through the rest of what's there, layer by layer. In between sessions, I have clients journal using what I call the O'Brien style method, which is how we bring those subconscious patterns into consciousness, the way I talked about in the last short. Here's what that can actually look like in practice. A pattern that started between ages 0 and 7 led to shame, which led to low self-confidence, which led to being bullied, which led to fear, and eventually to people-pleasing and a lack of ability to hold a boundary or being comfortable with confrontation. At 3 years old, avoiding confrontation was completely reasonable to expect. But that same response, still running decades later, is what's now showing up as anxiety and a lack of proper social defenses. And it's just no longer serving you. Most clients have never consciously connected these dots themselves. By journaling on it between sessions and bringing that pattern fully into the light, we can apply Reiki energy where it's actually needed, into the aura and the chakra system, and start to heal the anxiety at the root, not just at the surface. So how does the full process work to actually bring down your anxiety over time? I touched on this briefly in the last short, but in this one we're going to go deeper. So first is a 4 planes Reiki session, and this identifies the life history and the specific events that are actually feeding your anxiety. And it gives you a Reiki session targeted directly at those factors, not a generic one. After that, I give you journaling prompts built around your specific patterns, not generic journaling prompts. These are designed to help you see in your own words how that particular pattern actually shows up and operates in your life. Really valuable. That journaling process is really about knowing thyself. Genuinely, this is one of the most important parts of this whole approach. Once you actually know what's sitting in the subconscious, you can ask for healing on that exact thing instead of a vague something. Then in the next session, we ask for healing on those specific things together through your own free will and your own understanding of what needs it, not something done to you without your involvement. By that point, you've made progress on 2 fronts at once: real understanding and real world changes that start shifting the old habits. And on the energetic side, some of that, can be a lot of that, depends, gets balanced through the Reiki work itself. This isn't usually a one and done thing. The process repeats over weeks and months, going deeper each time, multiple sessions, and journaling in between. Every so often in that flow, if the fit's right, I'll also refer clients to another healer that I trust. He does a different kind of deeper energetic work that can really complement what we're doing very well. That's not something that I do specifically, but it is someone that I've seen really good results with, and I do refer some of my clients onto him. Okay, now, I have to be honest with you, everyone's timeline is different, and I'm not going to pretend I can hand you an exact number of sessions or months that will solve your anxiety. What I can tell you is bringing these patterns into the consciousness from the subconscious and working with them through journaling and through Reiki is a real path forward. It's the process I trust and use myself. If you want to explore what's actually driving your own anxiety, links in the bio. The first step is a 4 plane session, that's 1 hour, where we start figuring out exactly what we're working with.